The series is determining your future without knowing the future. Now that almost sounds like an impossibility. How can you determine your future if you don't know the future? But there are a few things that you can do that will absolutely determine certain things about the future for you. And values clarification is where we're starting today. The values that you embrace and that you live by are going to determine much of what your future looks like. And it doesn't matter what your values are or are not. The truth is those values will greatly determine the effect or the outcome of how your life looks at the end. And so if you're a person that, you say that you value God, then how you live that out is going to affect how your life is lived. If you say you value your family, then it's going to affect the outcome of those relationships. And we can go to several other areas, but we'll talk about those briefly coming up. But our memory verse for today, as we go into this, we're going to use Moses mainly as the example of this, even though there are many great examples in Scripture of values clarification. But our memory verse says this: by faith Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child. Now I would like to say this. In some ways you could look at that. We know who Moses became and we know what he did. We know he's one of the greatest men who ever lived from the Old Testament time period. Some people would argue and say he was the greatest man that ever lived and is recorded in the Old Testament. He wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. He is the one who rescued the children of Israel out of Egypt. It's one of the greatest examples of salvation, a story of salvation, God's redemptive nature. So there's all the parallels in there of that story and God's redemptive nature. Moses is the one that God gave the 10 Commandments to. And I had an interesting thought this week regarding that issue that I had never thought of before. And I know probably most of you have, so this is probably like, Rod, I can't believe you never thought of that before. But I never put these two things together. Moses is the one God handed the 10 Commandments to for him to come down. Of course, he had some anger issues. Anybody here have? No, don't raise your hand. But he had some anger issues. And so, and you could say he was righteously indignant, but he literally took the words God gave him and smashed them. So he had to have a redo, and a recall on the 10 Commandments. I think they came out the same though. And but the truth of the matter is, one of those commandments said, "Thou shalt not kill." Who did God give those 10 Commandments to? A guy who was a murderer, a guy who had killed somebody. I don't know why that just struck me, but here's what I want to say, and this isn't the message, but here's what I'm going to tell you. If you've ever done something in your life, you think, well, that was pretty bad. And I don't know if God could ever use me, could ever help me make a difference. The guy who killed someone, is one God gave the 10 Commandments to. So I'm wondering, when Moses was reading these, when he came down to that one, he's like, boy, thanks for reminding me of that one, God. Out here now, we're close to, but it's like, so he receives that commandment, and there he was, a murderer. He's the one God. So don't ever discount what God wants to do in you and through you, okay? That's just a passing thought. It's a new thought, one I'm going to be working on and trying to probably come up with something from some point. And I am going to take a few drinks because I know my voice is very irritating right now. I'm sorry. I want to read some words that Moses wrote from Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15 to 16, and then going down 17 through 19. It says this: today I'm giving you a choice. Now, Moses is speaking this, but he's really speaking. He's the mouth of God. I'm giving you a choice. You can choose life and success or death and disaster. I'm commanding you to love the Lord your God, to live the way he has told you, and to obey his laws and teachings. You're about to cross the Jordan River. and take the land that he is giving you. For if you obey him, you will live and become successful and powerful. God is saying to the children of Israel through his servant Moses, you have a choice to make. You have a choice. And it's interesting that God could have made us all robots. He could have made us people who had no choice. Now, what it would mean is if we all did everything God wants us to do all the time, we'd live in a safer world. We wouldn't face some of the things that we are dealing with in our culture, in our society, and even around the world. Because evil exists, and it's here, and it causes harm. Most of us do not escape it in this life. In some way, its reach gets to us. But God chose to give us a choice. And it's one of the greatest blessings that he's given to mankind. It's also one of the greatest responsibilities that we have. And I would say whenever we are irresponsible with it, then it becomes our greatest curse, the thing that works against us. Because if you notice, you can choose life and success or death and disaster. There's not a lot of room left in between there in the choices that we make. And so whenever it comes to values clarification, I just want to tell you this morning, what you value, the choices will affect the choices you make in life. And those choices you make in life will ultimately affect the outcome of your life. And so be careful, be strategic in what it is that you value. And there are some people who just sort of operate on this in neutral. Whatever happens, happens, and whatever goes. Understand that there are some things in life we can't control. But God has given us the ability to choose. And where we have that opportunity to choose, it's our responsibility to choose. And if we don't choose, we're neglecting that responsibility and kind of leaving it to fate, whatever that is. And so let's go on. Verse 17 says, but if you disobey and refuse to listen and are led away to worship other gods, you will be destroyed. You will not live long in that land across the Jordan that you're about to occupy. I am now giving you the choice between life and death, between God's blessing or curse. And I call heaven and earth to witness the choice you make. Choose life. Choose well. That declaration is for us today, too, that we would choose well. What is it that you value? What is it that is important to you? What is it that matters to you? What is it that guides the choices that you make in life? So many times we allow the circumstances of our life to determine the outcome of our life. And I would like to say that what happens to you in life is not nearly as important as how you respond to it. How you respond to what happens in life will have a lot more to do with the outcome of your life than what it is that's happened to you. And all of us here today probably have already had some things happen to us that we could either be bitter about, or that we could live a very angry life about, or that we could be vengeful people. And in all of that mix, the choice that we have to make is, am I going to allow these circumstances to control who I am and the choices I make, or am I going to allow the values that I have to make those choices and how I respond to it? Pardon me. We make our choices. I think if I could kind of summarize what I may be trying to communicate to you here is we make our choices, then they make us. Only the right values will give you the right future. If you meet, we talk a lot about some old crotchety person or something like that. Have you ever heard that? That's just an old crotchety person. They're just grouchy. They're just grouchy about everything. They didn't get grouchy because they got old. Even though getting old I'm beginning to think it might tempt you to get grouchy sometimes. I am kind of leaning in that direction a little bit. Like, this may just have to do with being old, stuff gets on my nerves. It didn't used to get on my nerves, you know. People, why can't everybody be as smart as I am and do things the right way, you know? I mean, just, you get this entitlement that is not good. It's not godly, and it's not right. But, so there's a little bit of the aging process that might sometimes make you come across that way. But really and truthfully, if you're an old grouchy person, it's because you started being grouchy a long time ago. And you've just become what you lived your life to become. You're the result. You're living out the end result of the choices that you've made, the values that you've lived by. And people, you know, Hunter's been playing baseball. He's still finishing up their season. And, you know, now Hunter is very athletic by nature, but when you put him in a very controlled environment, then sometimes he'll freeze up a little bit because he's worried about everybody's expectation. And so I could tell from his very first time he played, this kid can hit the ball. And so in practice, in their pitching practice teams, man, he just hit that ball. And so the coaches and everything excited, we got a hitter. You know, we got a hitter. Two things they'd always say, he's got a great throwing arm and he can hit. But when he would get up, the first season he played, he'd get up there. And of course, at that point, they're young enough. Most of the pitchers can't pitch real well. So if you just stand there and watch them, they'll walk you half the time or more, you know, most of the time. So he kind of learned, if you just stand there, look good, you know, get the best stance you can, whatever. Just watch them act like you want to hit it, but don't worry about it. Just hold the bat. Then you'll get a walk quite a bit. So he did that for the first season. Like, they're going, Hunter, hit the ball, swing. Bad pitches. He had excuses. But the next season, he kind of did the same thing. Now this was a team that both of the coaches were parents of boys on the team, and they did this travel baseball. And so they had about half a dozen guys on this team who were way better than the average kid at that age. These were excellent players. And so Hunter, you know, he's watching them go through all their stuff, and he'd get up there and the pitching was better. He'd still stand there and let him go by him. Like, and so the coaches, they came to us and going, look, in practice, Hunter hits the ball. What can we do to get him to hit the ball in the game? And I said, well, you know, honestly, you're the coach. I mean, you know, what do we do? I said, we practice some with him. We not as much as some people, but we practice some. What's the problem? Tell us. And so it's just like he's got a little perfectionist in him, and he just frees up. Like, I'm going to mess up. I'm not going to do it. Well, this year, he got put on a team that was it's a terrible team. I think most of the kids on it have never played baseball before. Maybe one other kid. And he's competing. They're competing against all these teams that do travel stuff and all that. And so this is a terrible team. I mean, good kids and everything, but just terrible team. And so most of these kids can't hit the ball. They can't do anything. So what has happened is, this is his third season. So now Hunter's hitting the ball. And so all of a sudden he went from feeling like a born loser to all of a sudden feeling like he's a star player. You know, not that he is that, but I'm saying, but he's hitting the ball kind of every time he gets up there. He's not afraid to hit the ball now. And so, you know, the truth of the matter is that all of us have our things that we feel like, hey, we get, that we're terrible at. And but what I do want to say to you is this: you'll get where you're going only by repeating the things you need to repeat in order to get there. You know, and the point I wanted to make from that story was this. So this year, there's another kid about his size. And there's about 3 of them are the bigger kids on the team. There's one kid about his size. He looks like a good ball player. Looks like he should be able to hit the ball well. And he gets up there and does just what Hunter used to do. And he stands there. So he's standing there now. Understand the pitching's better. And so about every other pitcher, a little bit more than that, it's a strike. And so this kid, I've watched now for the last half a dozen games, he'll stand there and he looks good. Looks like Hunter used to look. Like, man, I think he can do it. I think he can hit it. He'll stand there and the pitcher will pitch and the ump will go, strike. And he'll go, like he'll turn around and look at everybody like, why? Like, and then he does it till he strikes out. And then he's going like, walking away, shaking his head like, what is it? Why are you surprised at the result? You didn't swing the bat, you know? If you don't swing the bat, you're not going to get ahead. And I'm not bashing on him because Hunter used to do the same thing. It's just, a little earlier season. But it's like this kid better than anybody else. I mean, he needs to go into drama because this kid can put on, it should be like, this is the most unbelievable. I've been robbed again. I can't believe it. Can you guys all believe it? And it's like, it almost makes me want to go, man, we need to review those things. That kid looks shocked. He looks so shocked. And I have a feeling that many of us at this point in our lives even are a little bit surprised that we're where we are or we're not where we thought we would be. So we're kind of looking around going, I can't believe it. I can't believe that I'm not any farther along than this. I can't believe that I haven't been a better parent than I thought I would be. I can't believe I've got this result going on. I can't believe, you name it. I think most of us, even at this point, this stage in our lives, we're kind of wanting to act like that kid and go, how did this happen? How did this happen to me? I'm just going to tell you, get the surprise face off. Talking to myself too. Get the surprise face off and go, for the most part, I'm here because I chose to be here. I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing right now because I chose to experience it. I am living out the direct result of the choices I've made related to my values. Now, I know there are a lot of things that happen to us that have nothing to do with us. I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about the things that you can control, that you do have choices about, and that you do have say in. Those are things I'm talking about. And so I would like for us to be less surprised and become more determined to not wake up 5 years from now still being struck out with a bat in our hand going, what happened? What did they do? How did you call that? How am I here? How did I get struck out? You chose to get struck out. Now, I'm not being tough on that kid. He's a good kid, and he's going to be a good hitter, or at least a good drama guy some point. Well, he's going to be something really good, I can tell you that, but it may not be baseball. Don't be surprised about where you are in life because you're the one who got there. You go, Rod, I don't really like what you're saying. In fact, I'm about ready to get mad enough to get up and walk out. Now, I said that to keep you from going to the bathroom 3 more times while no, I'm just kidding. But see, the fact is, it's hard for us to sometimes face the fact that we are where we are because we lived out the values. And the question is, most of you aren't next door to the grave right now, so we've got some time on our hands. What are we going to do to live out the values? Now let's look at this story from Moses. It's from Hebrews chapter 11, verses 23 to 27. And it's a summary, a very brief summary. It's where Moses is listed in the Hall of Faith in the Bible, New Testament. It's a very brief summary, but it says some very powerful things. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because he saw he was no ordinary child. And they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. Now, in the story of Moses, and again, Moses is a very colorful person. There's a lot, we know a lot about him from his birth. We just don't know exactly how he died. We're just pretty certain he's in heaven with God right now. How he got there, whether it was through a death or whether it was just walking with God, we don't know 100%. But the fact is, we know a lot about Moses. He's just one of the great representatives of how God worked. He's a person who also demonstrates how God uses broken people. God uses people who have really royally messed up. And so there's so much from him. But just a quick overview is, and if you look at his life, first of all, God chose Moses. His parents noticed that he was no ordinary child. And again, I don't know of any parent who doesn't look at their child and go, hey, this is no ordinary child. This is our kid. Look at that. Man, this is a superstar right here. So we all have a tendency to look at our kid and think that. But whether there was something beyond that or not, but the fact is we know from the way the story happened. Thank you, Jim. I was going a little easy on the water because I thought I'd run out, so thank you. If I'd have known it was going to be this bad, I'd have bought candy bars or something to hand out at the end for you guys being so willing to sit here and listen to me talk like this. God chose him. His parents made choices for him, which affected his life. So understand this, parents. Choices you make for your children can deeply affect your children and their future. I've heard a few people over the years say this, well, I'm going to let my kids decide for themselves what they believe. Okay? If you're going to do that, then be fair. Let them decide when they should go to bed and when they should get up. Let them decide whether they should go to school or not. Let them decide what they're going to eat or not. I hate to tell you, that's one of the most foolish, if you've ever said that in your life, I'm sorry, I'm going to go ahead and say this anyway. That's one of the most foolish concepts that people have ever come up with. You can't control what your kids are going to believe, but if you think you don't have, God didn't you give that child for you to influence their thinking, to point them in the right direction spiritually, to think they're an eternal being, they're going to live someplace for eternity, and you're not going to have any influence on them spiritually, whatever they decide, they decide. Well, yeah, that's true. But in the meantime, they ought to have to walk over a whole lot of truth if they're going to decide something different than following God. They ought to be able to, they have to walk against a lot of your voice and what you have to say. So parents made choices for them. Any wise parent will make choices for your children. My kids are starting to get into that thing where they'd like to make every decision for themselves. But I'm just sorry. Sometimes dad knows best, And McDonald's isn't the best restaurant in the face of the earth. It's convenient sometimes, and it's cheaper than some places sometimes. But it is not the best restaurant, and you don't eat there every day, and you don't eat there every time you can. And so anyway, sometimes parents, you have to make choices for your kids. Moses then had to make choices himself as he matured, as he became an adult. And that's true for all of us. And but for us to understand, that's sort of the process that happened here. We see if you look through the life of Moses. Now, what I want to do is share with you 4 things that shaped Moses' outcome of his life. 4 things. The first is he refused to be defined by others. It says, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Now, that verse has some implications to it that I want to just speak to. I'm the father of 4 adopted children. And so there's a side of me that kind of wants to go and push back on that and go, listen, Moses, this woman saved you from the alligators. This woman saved you from certain death. Now, that's fine to go back to your birth mom and all that other stuff or whatever, but let's have some respect here, See, what it doesn't say is that he refused the fact that she raised him or that she was a part of his life. What he was refusing, as you'll see in the whole picture of his story, he was refusing to be identified as someone other than who he really was. And that was, in his case, he was a Jew. The Jewish people were slaves. He had a great opportunity to avoid all of that because he was raised in the palace. He had been raised by his mom up to a certain point, his birth mom, by a certain point. And so this Pharaoh's daughter really allowed for him to know a fair amount about his heritage and to know where he came from. And you have to tip your hat to her on that because she could have removed him completely from that. She did not choose to do that. She allowed his mother to be his nanny. And then he had the highest education possible, lived in the most prestigious place possible. He was a grandson to Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the world. He was not rejecting the kindness that he had received from there. He was rejecting the idea that God had rescued him only for his own self-absorption. He recognized and realized that God had rescued him for a purpose that was greater than his own life. It was a purpose to serve others. It was a purpose, it was that God had uniquely brought him and put him in situations and places so that he was uniquely equipped to be able to. Now, he went around it the wrong way and felt like he muffed God's plan. But God wasn't done with him. And so he refused to let other people define him. And I'm just going to tell you, we live in a world that wants to define everybody. You say something, they go, oh, you're like that. You believe that, so you're this. I mean, we live in a label crazy world. And it's in politics, it's in schools, it's in wherever you look. I mean, it is label crazy. If you have 50 bumper stickers on your car in a parking lot, I don't go around looking for people's bumper stickers, okay? So the only time I look at bumper stickers is when I'm stuck in one of these lights here in Columbia County that never changes for 20 minutes. And I have to read everybody's bumper stickers on the back just to entertain myself. That's the only time I read bumper stickers. But I will tell you, I have a hard time with bumper stickers for me personally because I have a hard time figuring out something that would represent me. Like, I'm going to put this in the back of my car. You know, I see like random stuff stuck on the back of people's cars sometimes. And I'm thinking, like, were you drunk or did someone just, where did that come from? Your kids play a trick on you or what? And then, I'm also, I have a little bit of a thing of like saying this represents me completely. And so, if you ever see me, and I'm not putting down anybody who has tattoos, they become very common ground here, haven't they? But I will say you this, if you ever see me with a tattoo on, it'll be because they hog-tied me, or I was drunk, which is not a very good chance as I don't drink, or something else really bad happened. They put me out and I thought I was getting surgery and I was really getting a tattoo. But the truth is, in my biggest issue isn't even about a tattoo. It's like, I can't think of any slogan or saying that I want to be branded with. Like, hey, that's Rod. That's what represents Rod. That's me. Okay, I'm not putting that on you, putting on anybody else. That's me. So I have a hard time with that. So when sometimes I have people go, even like someone who's trying to figure out, like I met someone this past week, nothing to do with the church, and they asked the question, so what do you do? They want to know, what do you do for a living? Told them I was a pastor. Always gets varied responses. The immediate thing they said to me was, so how do people go to heaven? And I'm like, well, that's interesting. I thought maybe you'd want me to ask you that question. But anyway, so I said, I gave him some kind of answer. Do you communion every week? I mean, it's like what they were wanting to know is, did I do church the way they thought I do church? So they were very church person, very engaged in their church. Let me get some more water. I'm sorry, guys. But what they were trying to do by asking me questions was wanting to go, what do I label this guy? What kind of pastor is he? Is he believe in the scripture? Does he believe in, whatever? That's okay. I was fine with that. I don't mind sharing that stuff at all. But we live in a world where people want to label you. They want to know what to label you. And sometimes they'll label you. So when people start pressing in and going, well, are you a pre-tribulation person? Are you this? Are you that? I kind of want to go, oh, wait just a minute. Here's how I really want to be defined. I really want to be defined as someone who believes the truth about Jesus, and I've personalized that for myself, and I'm working really, really hard at developing a long-term relationship with God through Christ. Now, I'm not saying it has to even be stated like that, but I'm okay with being labeled that way. But when you start wanting to label me this and that and the other and everything, it's like what I want to know is I'm willing to talk about it. I'll literally talk to you about any doctrine, any theology, but I want to know, where is that coming from? Where is that? What is, in other words, what are you hoping to accomplish from that? Because in my beliefs about the Bible, you know, I will go ahead and say this word, even though I'm a very conservative person when it comes to my belief about the Bible. And that means that I believe the Bible is true. It's God's word. And that it is reliable for everything. It doesn't contain error in it. And you can count on it. And that's not even like an appropriate doctrinal statement, but that's just, but at the same time, what I want to know is, why, what is it? Because someone may need assurance that you believe in Scripture. That's great. I want to give them that assurance. But I also want to know, what is it? Because sometimes it's fears. We want to label people because if you're like that, I don't trust you. If you're like this, I do trust you. That's okay to a point, but we're a little bit label crazy. I wanted to say this, and that is, be careful who defines your life. It needs to be defined through God's purpose for you. And so I'm just going to encourage you to be careful about who defines it. You know, a lot of people say things about us. Say things, you're this, you're that, you're the other, you could be, you might be. Be careful. Don't let the world around you squeeze you into its own mold, but let God remold your minds from within so that you may prove in practice that the plan of God for you is good. Romans 12:2, Philip's paraphrase. Number 2, choose short-term pain for long-term gain. You said, I know, kind of, if you're like my mind, I'm going, I don't choose any pain. I'm not going to go like, hey, I'll sign up for that one. That's a pain. Let's go ahead and get that. But there is something about going ahead and addressing something, dealing with it up front rather than have to deal with it later. Moses chose, verse 25, from Hebrews 11, Moses chose to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. You know, here's a question I want to ask you. Who are you blaming for your life? Well, if it hadn't been for that mom I had, or that dad I had, if it hadn't been for that brother or sister I had, if it hadn't been for that first boss I had, if it hadn't have been, who are you blaming for your life? Well, I'm here where I am today because of that skunk over there. Whoever that skunk is, you can put the label on him. Whoever that person was, I'm here because I'm in the condition I'm in right now because of that. You know, I just want to tell you, take responsibility for your own life. Take responsibility for your life. And oftentimes, if we will choose to endure pain up front, we'll get to enjoy gain later on. I believe that you're as close to God as you choose. If you say, well, God's distant, I just need to tell you, God hasn't moved. He hasn't moved any place. You're as close to God as you choose. And also, I'm going to say this, you can't live off of someone else's spiritual commitment. You know, you might have a spouse that's very spiritually committed, and you might think, you know, well, I'm this because they're that. You might have a grandfather who is a spiritual person or a spiritual, you know, sometimes maybe I'm having a conversation and someone to find out a pastor, they go, yeah, I think it's a great uncle or something that's a missionary. Well, that's wonderful. But what's going on with you? I don't mean about being a missionary. I'm just saying, see, it isn't about the people you know. It's about where are you with God. You can't live off of somebody else. And I also would say this, the right thing is almost always the harder thing to do in the immediate. The benefits tend to be in long term. Think about this. What choices are you going to make today to be where you want to be tomorrow? Well, I'll think about that tomorrow. I'll think about that next week. I'll think about that next year. You can never become who you want to become and accomplish what you want to accomplish by delaying action on it now. You have to start now. You have to put those values into place now. You know, saving money now is hard, but it makes life easy later. Spend it all right now is fun. It's easy. But it'll make your life hard later. And maybe some other people's lives hard later. God will use pain to help me grow. Not to be mean to you, not to be difficult, but to help you grow. And then the second thing is God will reward me in heaven. God will reward us. It says this, that even Moses, he regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasure of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. Turn your page over if you wouldn't mind. Number 3, choose what God values, not what culture values. Moses regarded, just the verse I read to you, Moses regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to this reward. What the world values is popularity, prestige, and power. Values pleasure, values possessions. Now, let me just say to you straight off the bat, there's nothing wrong with any of those. Nothing wrong with any of those. In fact, the reality is if you live out godly values in your life, you are going to have some of those things. You're going to have many of those things, but they'll be in a proper place in your life. What is it that God values? First of all, God's purpose is more important than popularity. In other words, you fulfill God's purpose in your life is much more important than winning a popularity contest. And so sometimes whenever you follow God, everybody applauds you, and that's great. But there's sometimes when you follow God and fulfill his purpose in your life, that actually people may resist you. They may actually work against you. We have people, right, even in our own church, sometimes they have family members that are not believers. And they endeavor to make it hard for whether it's their children or sibling or whatever, or to make it hard for them to follow God, to be disruptive about that in their lives. If you've never experienced that, that's kind of hard to believe, but it's very true. I see it happen in a number of people's lives. And whereas God's purpose it seems like a foolish thing to some people and to some parents of their kids and things like that. And so sometimes you're going to follow God. You're putting his purpose above being well-liked or popular. Number 2, people are more important than pleasures. It says in this verse that, in verse 25, it says that he had decided that he would read it exactly for you. He chose to be mistreated among the people of God rather than enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. People are more important than pleasures. In other words, you have to let me just ask you this. I mean, those of you that have babies still in your house, is it more pleasurable to sleep or to get up to a crying baby? What's more pleasurable? Amanda, do you have any word on that? It's like, we know the answer. It's much more pleasurable speech, but you know what? You put aside that pleasure in order to do what's right. That's all. You know, here's the thing. Some people get this idea that God's against pleasure. God created every pleasure you know. You know, and don't ever forget, you know, the big thing out there is, you know, sex and that kind of thing. I'm just going to tell you, God created that, okay? That was his idea. So if you're thinking he's a killjoy, just remember he created everything that is good in this life. The problem is some people live only for pleasure, and they put pleasure way ahead of priorities. And people are a much greater priority than pleasure. That's what we call maturity, when people understand where to put pleasure in the right places. And Moses, he understood, and he even referred, and also say this. Sometimes people want to go, well, why would people want to do bad things? You know, how would they want to be bad sinners? Well, it says right in the scripture, the pleasure of sin. There is pleasure in sin. If there was no pleasure in sin, nobody would want to do it. I mean, there is pleasure in sin. There's pleasure in rebellion. There's pleasure in doing your own thing. There's pleasure in being selfish. There's pleasure in just satisfying all the desires that you have selfishly. There's pleasure in that. What you have to do is realize that people are more important than you just having pleasure in life. People will live forever. Pleasure is temporary. Good thing in many cases, not sin, pleasure, but pleasure in itself is a good thing, but it's not better than investing in people. And so balance is key here. What does God value? Peace of mind is more valuable than possessions. Doesn't mean possessions are wrong. There are some people that have no possessions and have no peace of mind. There are some people who have much in the way of possessions and have great peace of mind. So they're not exclusive to each other, mutually exclusive. But what it is saying is, if you're going to make a decision here, and it says that Moses regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. Moses had to make some tough decisions. He could have lived a very cushy life for the rest of his life and gone, you know what? I don't know what happened to all those, my brothers and sisters out there, the Hebrew children, but it looks like God wanted me to live a good life. I got it going on here. I mean, he's living in the palace. He's got it all. He has everything. But at some point, he had to ask himself the question, is just consuming all this to myself what I'm about, or benefiting, helping other people? And in doing so, he had to give up some of the things that were his cushes in life in order to be able to accomplish. He couldn't have both. He couldn't keep both. Some people can, but in his case, he wasn't able to. And so the peace of mind that he decided to do was the obedience to do what God called him to do. Number 4, choose to live by faith and not by fear. By faith, Moses left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. For all of Moses' problems and difficulties and anger, while his relationship with God was amazing, he saw him who is invisible. When you have a picture of God, who he is and what he's like, when your faith is connected to him, it changes everything in our outlook. Everything. Question is this: has anybody heard? I forget right now. Maybe it's anyway. It doesn't matter his name, but "Fear is a Liar." Anybody heard that song on the radio? "Fear is a Liar." And I just want to tell you that some songs are cute and some songs are whatever, but the truth is, fear is a liar. And a lot of the fears that we have, God gave us fear as a good instinct for many things. But when we live by fear, it's a very dark, terrible place to live. So choose to live by faith, seeing God, who is invisible to our eye, but perceiving him through faith and understanding him through his word, understanding him through the Spirit that lives in us, and living our life according to the vision that we have of who God is, not what we can do. Many of the things that Moses accomplished were way beyond what he could do himself. But he believed that the God who had brought him before Pharaoh was the God who would lead him out, and the children of Israel out of Pharaoh, out of Egypt, and in doing so that they would be set free. But you have to have that vision. What is it? What is it today that's holding you back from living out the values that God has placed in your life? That you know are values you own, but maybe you're not really living up to them. You're not following through with them. What is that? I would encourage you to lay that down today and decide today you're going to start living like you're dying, and living in such a way so that whenever it comes down to this point, when life is leaving you with little left, you don't have to look back with huge regrets. We'll all have some. but we say, I got here because I lived out the values. I chose values that led me to this place. And it's a good place. Much better than standing there like the boy with the bat when you're down to the last inning of this life and you're standing there and you're going, how did this happen? How did I get here? I have no idea why life is such